This is Viticulture, where we share conversations with makers, growers, thinkers, and doers, folks who cultivate a good life. My name is Chris Missing, and I'm a lawyer turned winemaker in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and I'm sitting down with great people in wine and other walks of life to hear their stories, learn their lessons, and take their advice on the perfect pairing. In an historic sheep barn, well over a century old, Derek and Stacy Edinger of Brewery Ardennes are making their craft beverage dreams come true, and in the process, bringing a valuable new experience to the Finger Lakes. Located in Geneva, New York, just around the corner from our Geneva tasting room, the culmination of their careers in high-tech, engineering, and hospitality have laid the groundwork for an ambitious and exciting project. If you like this podcast, please be sure to rate us 5 stars in Apple Podcasts and like our videos on YouTube. It really helps with the ratings and in introducing new folks to the show. And don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com, subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And check us out on all the major social media platforms. And now, here's the show. Welcome to Viticulture, and today we're sitting down with Derek and Stacy Edinger, who have recently launched an impressive project called Brewery Ardennes in Geneva, New York. They've taken a historical building, they've made it beautiful, they're attracting customers from all over the region, and I anticipate the world. In fact, I recently had a person from Belgium tell me this is the best Belgian ale they've had outside of their home country. So thank you so much for joining us today, Derek and Stacy.
Thanks, Chris.
Real pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having us.
And we haven't had a chance to sit down and really get to know each other, so I've been looking forward to this opportunity because you have a fascinating story. And let's just start with this building. Now, before you guys had bought it, I walked through, and I thought, man, this would be a great winery. But there was so much work ahead of us that we decided not to do a project there. But you had the fortitude and the courage to do it. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about why Geneva. And then I want to explore some more about your past and what brought you to this point.
Yeah, well, maybe we're martyrs, but we both love older structures, interesting architecture. Yeah. I think for the last 2 or 3 places we've lived have been older homes. Pre-war bungalows, Tudors, and we've done some pretty big restoration projects. So we kind of like that, which probably drew us a little bit to it. But we were looking for kind of a farm setting for something like this, and people often ask how did you find this place or what happened? I don't know. I guess the kind of funny story is. Zillow.com. We found the listing. I mean, definitely the site, the architecture, the barn, that was the immediate attraction. Yeah. We were looking all over the Finger Lakes and Hudson River Valley a little bit. And then we found the property first and then sort of rationalized Geneva after the fact or as part of the decision.
I think you were very generous with the words you chose about our motivation here. It was a little crazy, I admit. So when we saw it from the first time, it was rough. I mean, the inside was, a 120-year-old sheep barn with pens and 120 years of, bird nests and corn cobs and all kinds of stuff. But it was, I think, given the projects that we've done before, just residential projects, when we've ripped off roofs of houses and redone a lot of things, we could see the potential for it, which was really fun and exciting and scary all the same time.
So when I walked through, this was probably 4 years ago. And I don't think there had been sheep in there for probably 2 decades or more. And it still smelled like that. Were there any cool finds in the process of restoring the building, old newspapers, remnants of what had been there before?
Oh, big time. to answer your first question, as far as we can tell, it hadn't been used since maybe the 70s. So the previous owners weren't farmers. So from what we can tell, there was a whole bunch of stuff in there, and we got some cool examples. But everything that was in there when they bought it, I think in the mid 70s.
They didn't touch it.
And then we've gotten to know the previous owners who are self-admitted, pack rats and never get rid of anything. So we think a lot of the stuff that was in there, is probably also 110 years old. But a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, the second story was the former hayloft, and so, like the attic or basement in your house, you just stick it up there and forget about it, kind of. So we found a lot of useful kind of antique kind of furniture that we tried to repurpose in the barn and both in our house. There was a ton of farm implements that we have used in the house, but probably the two biggest finds. The first one's a little bit more serious. We found what we didn't really understand at the time. We thought they were icebox doors, and it turns out that the original owner of the farm at the turn of the century had a state-of-the-art ice house in 1909 with, 30 or 40 of these, 2-foot by 3-foot wood paneled doors that ended up being strewn across all the acres and barns that she had. Yeah. And we had probably 6 or 8 in our hayloft that were, had 100 years of dirt on them and rusted kind of hinges. And we found an amazing woodworker locally that stripped down the wood, stripped off the metal. It's the original metal hinges, and it's in our tasting room now, which, it looks brand new, and you can't tell. What a cool story, 120 years.
It is amazing. And it's amazing to think, what it took in those days to get some of that ice here.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any of the backstory on that? Because they were bringing it down in the summer. I imagine they had to be using the Erie Canal.
I don't know how they got it here, but a great resource for the history. And as much as we love the architecture, we've been learning about the history and the family and everything that goes with it. A great resource is our neighbor, Robbie Poole, whose parents bought the farm from the original builder, I think in the 30s or 40s. So they know, almost most of the 100 years of history. But the ice house is up next to his residence, which was the original farm owner's house. And we understand the ice house supported the entire farm, and it was like 4 farms in one, like 800 acres. So they bring huge blocks into this large concrete and lead-lined room, and then there were all these access doors, which we have a few of, that you'd kind of reach in and get it. But it lasts year round, I think.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you guys are living at the property now, right? Mm-hmm. Where did you transplant from? Where were you before you came here? I know you guys have been all over the country, really, so that might be a longer story.
Yeah,
it is. We met at Cornell and kind of decided to sow our roots outside of where we had grown up. I grew up in Massachusetts, and Derek grew up in a farm not far from here in Marion,
New York, a little bit north of here.
Yeah, and so we first moved to Dallas when we graduated college, and then ended up migrating to the San Francisco Bay Area, and we were there for almost 20 years. Yeah. Interesting place to live. There's a lot of, different microclimates, obviously wine country, craft beer is really big on the West Coast. So it was a really fun kind of experience to go to Lake Tahoe or go to Sonoma or Napa or Monterey and just experience a lot of these little micro kind of environments, and then ended up kind of navigating our way back to Ithaca in 2015. I joke that we moved so that Derek could out of Silicon Valley so Derek could start a technology company. Like, that makes no sense, but we had an opportunity to come back closer to home and took that chance and lived in Ithaca until 2020, 19.
So that was sort of our first big life-changing event. We kind of settled in California for a while and into two kind of steady careers. And so the first big risk was moving across the country. We both made some pretty big career changes. I started a company at the time, the brewery was going to be part of the mix too back in 2015. But that was sort of like the first big leap, which led to this leap, I think. Laid the foundation for that anyway.
So it's interesting. We had some California overlap together. So I was born out in Orange County, but went to college up in Sacramento. So I lived there between 98 and like about 04. We used to call it the city when we'd go and visit San Francisco, but same sort of thing. That's where I first really fell in love with both craft beer and wine. Your access to that world is amazing out there. You were also there for a really big change, I imagine, in what kind of the lifestyle in San Francisco was like. I remember in the late 90s, it was an amazing city, and it really did feel like it just couldn't confront some of its big problems.
We were there, just 1 year after you, in '99 is when we moved there, and that was pre.com everything. So it was still Silicon Valley, right? So there's still big tech, but all the .com hadn't happened. So that had a bubble. There was the housing bubble. So it definitely we saw a lot of changes in the 20 or so years we were there.
In some ways, moving from San Francisco to Ithaca was probably a good transition, because Ithaca has often reminded me of towns like Berkeley. University town, lots of great food, walkable. Obviously, the weather's a little different than Berkeley, but it was probably served as a really good transition for you.
Well, we've got a friend that we went to Cornell with who did his, I think it was a doctoral postdoc at Berkeley, and now he's back at a professor at Cornell. So he experienced both, and he would say that Ithaca is more hippie than Berkeley. Like Berkeley used to be, in the 60s or so, but then, the whole area is kind of growing and becoming gentrified, and you can't really afford to be a hippie or an artist there. So now he's pretty convinced that Ithaca is more hippie than Berkeley now.
So I'm old enough now where I remember the great battles when Gap opened up a shop in Berkeley. I mean, the 90s was a big period of transition for the town, and it is. It's unaffordable for just about anybody working even a really good job. But Ithaca, anybody listening out there, you still can come here. Housing prices are still affordable.
For sure.
What did you guys study in undergrad? Were you in the same programs, and how was it that you met?
I was in the hotel school, and he was across the quad in the engineering school. Always tried to gravitate to the cool kids at the hotel school.
They get the wine class.
Exactly. So that was the only class that we took together.
Yep.
I got a higher grade than he did. But yeah, we met. I was a freshman and you were a sophomore, and
met over beer.
Met over beer.
It wasn't good beer.
No.
I met my wife over a beer as well.
Okay.
I was drinking Guinness.
That was a little bit better than what we were drinking.
I think it was Milwaukee's best in the fraternity basement.
Nice. What fraternity were you in?
I was in Delta Phi Lenrock.
Okay, great. So you meet, you go off on your life's adventures. Were you brewing as a home brewer this whole time, Derek?
Most of it. I first time I brewed was just helping a friend out in college in Ithaca. I wouldn't call myself a home brewer at that time, just sort of a helper and appreciator. But our college years were formative in a lot of different ways. Definitely got into craft beer at that time. And this was the early 90s, and craft beer was starting to really kind of grow. There was a great place in Ithaca called the Chapter House, which is very sadly no longer, but great place for craft beer. They even made a little bit of their own beer. And then when we were in Dallas, I think we were kind of jumping into our careers. We had a little apartment, and didn't was getting more and more into craft beer, but not really brewing. Then 4 years later, we moved to California. We got a townhouse, had a garage, and I think pretty soon after going there, dove in. Bought my first homebrew kit and equipment. And so that was 99, started homebrewing then, and just sort of kept growing ever since.
That's great.
Well, let's be clear.
I knew this was going to come.
You started on our kitchen stove, the first batch, and made a mess. And I said, go to the garage. And so I think there were couple more batches and, plastic buckets involved and all this stuff. And he started to think, I need a little bit more equipment to do this more effectively. And in tandem with this had really, we were kind of far enough into our careers that we had a little bit of disposable income, so could go to some nicer wine or beer shops. And he started buying Belgian beers that were really expensive, And so he decided to engineer it, nerd it out, and he brought me this spreadsheet and said, if I make beer, this is how much it is per beer, and I can make this, what we're buying, it'll be so much cheaper. And that was how it started.
That's awesome. And then, of course, the engineer in me, I love the gadgets and the equipment and, optimizing it, making it better. So I kept on upgrading, buying more equipment. And so then she would keep reminding me of the initial pitch to her. So now, the amortization has gone to infinity.
Where's the 23 cents a beer I was promised?
It's funny, though, plastic buckets, it's where I started with winemaking.
Mm-hmm.
And similar story. I'd gotten up early. It was a Sunday morning because I knew, I was going to be bottling in the kitchen, and I didn't want to make too much of a mess. And I'm not an engineer, and I didn't tighten the bolt with that little spigot on those home winemaking buckets tight enough. And so I'm bottling, and I pull the tubing a little too hard. The nut comes off, and I'm sitting there with my thumb in the hole at the bottom. I don't want to wake my wife up, but I'm like, what am I going to do now? She comes out. This was just a Cabernet Sauvignon. There's wine all over the floor in the kitchen. She says, "What are you doing?" And it was about 2 years later that we end up buying a winery. So
that sounds
Fast
similar.
track.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that adding fruit to beer makes stuff explode. So instead of on the floor, several things ended up on our ceiling.
Yeah, just because you're an engineer doesn't mean you don't have accidents. Yeah, but that's probably the most notorious accident. Is I graduated from the buckets to the glass carboys.
Yep.
For the folks not knowing what it is, like a water cooler bottle upside down with a thin little neck. Glass, more sanitary, whatnot. So I think that was my first fruit beer. You make the beer, you let it ferment, and you put the fruit in it, and then it will re-ferment. So this was putting strawberries in a wheat beer. It starts to ferment, creates pressure. It pushed the strawberries up into the neck, which clogged, but it kept fermenting, make more pressure, boom. And the carboy was sitting in like a little first floor, like half bath we had, and it was just
Covered
walls, ceiling, everywhere.
It's an amazing feeling when you first realize, after you've made your first kind of home beverage, though, that tastes good,
mm-hmm.
like the power you have to make what you want to make.
Yeah.
Did you do any schooling or classes, or was it trial by error, books and YouTube?
Yeah, you definitely learn as I go. And what I tell a lot of people is, the first batch I made, which I think was a English nut brown ale, tasted pretty good. Yeah. So, but then the second batch, which was a pale ale, was terrible. But if the first beer hadn't tasted good, probably would have not stuck with it.
Yeah.
The problem was learning to do it, doing it well all the time. And for a long time, it was like good one, bad one, good one, bad one. But at least I knew I could make a good one, which made me want to do more. But a lot of no formal schooling, but books, internet, homebrew clubs, getting together with other homebrewers, having them come over and making beer with them. Just a lot of sort of learning as you go.
And I think that whole point of making bad batches early on, like that's where you learn what you've done wrong.
Yeah.
Failure is the path to success.
Yeah.
And I am a proponent, obviously, of higher education. If you want to go to school, go to school. Finger Lakes has a great viticulture program with their community college. But I have a friend, he's probably going to listen to this at some point, one of these amazing musicians, right? Like just gifted at birth, ended up studying jazz composition at USC. And we were in a band together for a little while. And I always joked around, well, I learned it the hard way. And he says, what do you mean you learned it the hard way? I had to go to college. No, I had to teach myself. Not that that's necessarily always true, but there is value in learning, quote, the hard way by mistakes.
Yeah.
So I've heard a lot of great things recently about the beers you guys are making. Let's focus for just a little bit on the product line, but then I want to come back to just some other career stuff. So what have you decided to hone in on, and why did you decide to focus on those products with Brewery Ardennes?
Well, Brewery Ardennes in the name is a Belgian beer focus. So Ardennes is a region in eastern Belgium. Yeah. We like Belgian style beer. It's probably our favorite. So a little bit of selfish interest there. But the thing we kind of grappled with that we thought about as we were talking to other professional brewers, a lot of whom were home brewers, is you have to be careful of, home brewers make the beer that they like, professional brewers make the beer that the public likes. Yeah. So we had to, it was a little bit of a thoughtful decision, but we thought, generally, Belgian beers are approachable. Mm-hmm. They're not generally very hoppy. There are some weird sour ones, but a lot of them, big cross section of them, I think are pretty approachable to people. There's not too many places focusing on it. If we try to do another place that had a huge lineup of IPAs, that's a pretty crowded market. Not that IPAs are bad. We have IPAs in our lineup. I like them. I just didn't want to have that be the only thing. So that was kind of our gamble to see if that would work, and it seems to. Yeah. And we kind of built the product line around that in different flavors, I suppose.
And I think your focus has always been the beer, but as we've traveled and visited Belgium, a lot of the things that really struck us was the food that goes with it. And I love to eat. He's a great cook in addition to making great beer. And so, a lot of what we focused on as we've been able to travel and see the world has been where are we going to eat and what are we going to drink with it, and get to know the people in the communities that we're visiting, which has been super fun. And that's how we've, I think maybe early as little kids, we focused on, what gift am I going to get? And now as we've gotten older, it's what experience am I going to have and what memory am I going to make? And I think that became really important to us to try to do something that we felt really good about, and trying to help people understand that it doesn't only have to be, of no offense, wine and food. Yep. It can be beer and food, and it's just as diverse, or cider and food. Yep. Which is it's been really fun for us.
Yeah, I think we think of, quote, the product as something bigger, which is kind of our crazy vision that, obviously it's beer and brewery's in the name, but I think we really think of what we're doing holistically as the beer, the food, and the experience, and the place, and the service, and this sort of complete thing. Because a lot of places might focus on one of those. Yeah. Really great wine that's made in a little like barn or shack, or a really great restaurant that maybe has some might have some decent food or beer, or some sort of destination that doesn't have anything else to offer. We're trying to do all three is the product.
Yeah, and it is becoming a destination. In fact, first time I met Derek talking about Belgian beers, I said Mole Friet. Hopefully you've got Mole Friet. One of our old wine projects was with someone from Luxembourg, originally from Belgium. And I'll tell you, I had always loved mussels before, but having the chance to taste, really great Mole Friet. Yep. So I'm looking forward. You guys are doing that, right?
Oh, yeah.
What else? What other food are you guys pairing?
Actually, that was also a bit of a gamble too. Like, well, if we're going to do a Belgian thing, do we do the Mole Friet, and will that take off? And the answer is
it really has. Yeah. I think our first weekend we sold like 75 pounds of mussels. Like there was no way to predict how much people would eat. And I think by the last 3 or 4 hours on a Sunday when we ran out, people were like, well, you ran out? I'm like, yes, we sold every mussel in Geneva. I'm sorry. So it's been really fun to see people experience it and kind of, seek it out.
Yeah. For people who aren't aware of the beer scene in the Finger Lakes region, one, I think you're an amazing addition. And two, it's sort of what we're seeing in wine. It is this idea of specialization of your craft. There's a really great project, the Bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. He's focused exclusively on English cask ales. Cool. You're right. There's some really great producers of hoppy beers. And then even the big dog up in Rochester, Dean Jones, is doing some amazing stuff with lagers and, you name it. So I think that's a really cool feature because it's no longer just like a beer trail. You're going to try people's variations on IPAs. It is cultural experiences. Like you are bringing something more to the table than just a beverage. I got to be honest, the idea of managing that kind of inventory of shellfish, you're braver than I in more than one way.
It's been interesting. We were just talking about how to figure out. We talked about inventory in that same cooler space of managing all the beer kegs, and the engineer came out in him trying to figure out like the cubic capacity of how many kegs he could fit in the cooler stacked and all that. But it's it pushes and pulls us, I think, in different ways, and I think that was maybe why we gravitated to he's always made the beer and I've been the product tester, but we had office jobs, for lack of a better term. I mean, we went to, we managed teams. But we primarily worked in traditional kind of office settings. And I think doing something kind of hands-on in our off time was tiring, but yet so different that we really enjoyed that experience. And so that was kind of how it started. So, you talk about making something, and especially with actually having it turn out really well. And that was kind of the leap for us when people, started actually gravitating towards the free beer we were serving at parties to then saying, you should sell this. Like, I think you could actually make money at this, which was kind of an interesting mind shift for us.
Yep. I think that's an interesting point. So one of the things I love talking about is the maker's spirit. This idea of, it's probably not everybody in the world, but some of us are just drawn to create. Now, that can be paintings, that can be gardens, whatever it is. But there is something that no matter how hard the work is, how vigorously you have to work at it, the reward outweighs every bead of sweat that falls from your brow. And I think that is, in essence, like the spirit of America, right? If you ask me what America is, it is a maker's nation. And there are times I felt like we were losing that, but I see so much hope and I have so much optimism that is being reinstilled and reinvigorated in people in every age group. So I was curious, you start with a degree in hospitality from Cornell. Did you continue working in hospitality in other ways?
Yeah, I stayed in hotels, of branded and independent hotels, and was in managing events and sales and marketing and training and a number of different things. And in the latter part of my career, I had the chance to kind of have a global role. And for me, that was so interesting to get to know just everyone's perspective in a different country, how I could interact with someone in Japan or Australia, and they had all the same aspirations and apprehensions and, pits in their stomach that I had, or that I had friends with those same, aspirations and hesitations. And so that was really kind of what was interesting. And I think that's what we've tried to create. Like, if we said, okay, if we have a blank slate and we've saved our money and we could now do something together, what kind of place do we want to have? We've looked at team members that had different skill sets to us, that think differently to us, and sometimes I kind of scratch my head when someone says something because it's so different than my point of view. But that's actually healthy. Like, they help me grow. And I think everyone kind of is a rallying cry around just make this place special and different, so that we want to get out of bed and work really hard and stand on our feet and interact and sell 75 pounds of muscles every day, But that's really kind of what's driven, I think, me in particular to try to create on our own.
Yeah. It seems like having that kind of a background is a really good training ground for launching your own hospitality-based project. I actually hadn't been fully aware that that was your background, but it
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense. What do you think were the key skills you developed in your career that you've been able to implement at Brewery Ardennes?
Similar to Derek's beer journey as a home brewer, it's, you know, I think we need to feel good about the brand and the direction that we're trying to go. But we also have to understand and listen to the customer. And I think that's, it's really hard to set aside your ego at some point and say, I do everything perfectly. What do you mean this customer didn't like their experience? But try to get to what is it they're actually telling me or trying to articulate that I might be missing that could make the experience better. So I think that was one of the first things, was kind of setting aside my own expectations, and kind of listening to the people that are in front of us and around us.
That's a hard thing to do.
It really is.
Because, and not even just in kind of my own world of my experience, you work so hard at something,
Mm-hmm.
and especially when you're an entrepreneur or small business owner or a maker of some sort, like, it's hard to understand why anyone wouldn't like what you're making, but there's a reason for it,
Yeah.
and it is valuable input.
Yeah. And I think, the pandemic was an interesting experience to be planning this and think about impacting our business model and what we wanted to accomplish. And I know a lot of small businesses were really, breweries, winery, all segments in industries were really impacted in those small businesses.
Yeah.
But I think, all of us will kind of rise again and reinvigorated by, we like making and we like going to the neighborhood shop or, going to buy a bottle off a shelf at a local winery that I know the owners. And I think a lot of us kind of gravitated to that nostalgia, which is probably really close to home, that makes us feel comfortable. And so I think a lot of us will see that byproduct come back after the pandemic, which is really good.
So that's another thing that I forgot to mention. Like, you guys initiate this project, and then there's a global pandemic and everything shut down. What were the ways that this impacted you? Because there was a lot of work to be done. There was a period where we weren't even sure people would be allowed in the construction industry, even when you're outside during the lockdown a year ago. What was going through your heads, and how did that impact this project?
Well, I mean, our story is, the actual day that we acquired the property was March 13th, 2020, the day New York went on pause. So that made us go.
Sign.
Made us pause a little bit. But, I guess quickly leaping forward, I guess karma does come back to you. The day that we had our grand opening was May 19th, the day that the mask mandate went away for vaccinated folks. So that, that was sort of nice. But no, we definitely kind of wondered, because we put our business model together, pre-pandemic, late 19, early 20. And then it kind of all went out the window. But I think, the fortunate thing was we weren't open yet. So, we saw a lot of other craft breweries have to, they struggled, or they had to rapidly pivot or change their business model or change their physical plant kind of on the fly, or at least attempt to. Our business was only on paper. So that was nice. So we definitely made some shifts. Our original business model was going to focus more on events, or have that as a bigger part of it. There's a great loft in the barn that we were talking about that we didn't get rid of it. We just sort of deferred it. That might be something we could do down the road, but a big focus on events. And then at the same time, we weren't focusing a whole lot on the outdoor space. And we had a kitchen in the plan, but it was a bit smaller. So we kind of scaled the events down. Not a great thing to spend your money on in the pandemic,
No.
Large gatherings and whatnot. But then a lot of folks may or may not know that one of the things that allowed breweries and wineries to stay open is that they had to offer food. So, maybe focusing more on food would be a good thing, and outdoor space where you could social distance. So those were easier changes for us to make because they were on paper. But, all that said, there were still challenges. We faced a lot of people faced people unavailability of people, contractors, random materials and equipment were more expensive or were hard to get. So that
lumber went up 280%.
Yeah. Controlling the construction costs was a challenge. Yep. We started looking for financing from banks and SBA in late December, early January, right before the pandemic really became, predominant in the U.S. And we early on had conversations with the banks to say, what about this COVID thing? How is that going to impact things? Yeah. And so, we found some great partners that really, valued that relationship with the small businesses that they support. And so their focus obviously became, how do we take care of our current customers through all the changing SBA rules and all of those things. So, for us, it was figuring out a longer time horizon, not to have financing, because it took us a lot longer to secure the funding. And how did we manage through that? So that was another challenge, but
tough. They were really excited up front. And I suspect this is still the case now, that, the lenders heads are above water, but they love craft beverage industries, at least in the region, because they're fast growing. So, from a dollars and cents standpoint, they like investing in them, but then they got swamped with keeping their current businesses afloat, which we totally understand. And then, craft beverage is a heavily regulated industry. There's licenses, liquor licenses, brewing licenses. And then, for your physical plant, you need, probably a whole lot of different approvals. The other place we got kind of hung up was, we had to go through the local, planning board process, to get our business approved and so forth. And, small town planning board, like, they don't know how to handle a pandemic. Like, what's Zoom? How can we do this remotely? So, it took a little while for them to kind of figure out how to do meetings and public hearings when you couldn't gather people together. So I think that was a learning curve for everybody. Now everyone knows how to use Zoom, I guess.
Now everyone's sick of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting because, I think the economics of breweries actually make a lot more sense than the economics of wineries. And one of the first things that struck me is how differently we have to think about our two businesses, even though they're in, adult beverage space. Which is, wineries think place first. Where can I grow this? And breweries, it really is more of a cultural decision, because although you can grow and source a lot of in New York, what you might need, it's not as necessary to think that way, it seems. Do you ever regret you didn't end up in the Hudson Valley? Or are you pretty happy with how the Finger Lakes is so far?
Yeah, I think so. Like I mentioned earlier, we kind of found the property first and rationalized Geneva after the fact, but obviously we wouldn't be here today if the decision wasn't yes. So we thought, one of the reasons we moved to the Finger Lakes, we favored a bit more because we kind of knew it, and it just has a great quality of life, a bit more affordable. But, we kind of looked at Geneva and said, hey, it's kind of right at the heart of it. It's right at the sort of the entrance to Seneca Lake, which has the most amount of wineries and probably the most amount of breweries, equidistance from Rochester, Syracuse, Ithaca. And one thing that we really discovered after coming back to the region is that, the Finger Lakes draws more than just the locals, which it used to, maybe 30 years ago. People are coming in, so you didn't have to be a short drive from, downstate or Pennsylvania. I mean, these folks are coming up for long weekends and for a week vacation. So we said, well, that I think it makes sense then.
And it does seem, so I was noticing this trend over the last decade of, we always had Pennsylvania as great supporters, increasingly Ohio, more Massachusetts, and that circle is getting bigger. But I feel like the pandemic did help people refocus a bit, and they're trying to discover their own places more. So it's not just locals, but definitely more New York City coming up here. And in some of even, Cleveland, some of these other cities not too far. It's been great. I've been thrilled to be able to meet these other folks coming in to the region and constantly hearing this place is amazing. It really is.
I think in the big picture, it's great for the region. I think if you're sort of in in the home market shopping for a home right now, you might be a bit frustrated, but we're seeing a lot of folks relocating here. That's one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic is people are discovering that they can, a lot of jobs they can work wherever, and they want to go to some place with a better quality of life.
Yep. I think I know a smart man building some houses. My dad.
Right place at the right time.
Yep. So the other thing that you mentioned, I want to just circle back to, Derek, is if you've been a home winemaker or a home brewer, and then all of a sudden you've got like 3 federal government agencies to deal with, 4 state agencies, and then all these other local government apparatuses. That is a challenge. Yeah. And I still remember, early 2012 filling out our first, TTB, Tax and Trade Bureau reports on gallonage and getting confused. And how has that learning curve been for you guys?
It's a learning curve. Definitely. I mean, if you're going to come into this, you got to be ready for that. I mean, a lot of it is, there's a big chunk of it that's one time up front, but then there's a component of it that stays with you forever. But you just have to, I think that it's part of the entrepreneurial spirit. You have to love challenges. No barrier gets in your way. I once talked to a VC in San Francisco who says, I like the startup founder who's going to come up to a brick wall, and keep bashing their head on it until they break through it. So you just have to kind of keep pushing, whether it's in the paperwork or whether it's any other challenge that you might find. But on a positive note, there are a lot of resources out there, and the craft beverage industry, I think, unlike any other industry I can think of, is super collaborative. People you would think would be your competitors are your best friends, and they'll help you. So there's a lot of, the brewer next door you could ask questions to, and they'll tell you anything and everything, and more things that you didn't know that you needed to worry about. They said, well, be careful this, be careful this. So there's a lot of resources there, and these folks have been through it, so that they can help you out. You're not on your own for sure.
It's true. When we launched this podcast, we launched with Scott Osborne from Fox Run. And I wanted to do that, one, because he's kind of a legend in the Finger Lakes, but 2, he embodied that collaborative spirit for me, because just like you were able to go speak with those other brewers, he talked me through everything I needed. And you're right. You don't see that in a lot of industries. And I think you see it here because we're still growing, because we're still young. We're kind of hard scrabble at times, and we understand that rising tides will rise all the boats.
Yep.
Yes,
for sure.
So I'm not sure if the industries in places like California are like that. I've heard they're not, but I'm sure there's cliques of people helping each other. So your career trajectory, Derek, you said you focused on tech. You were in Silicon Valley. You end up coming back to Cornell to start a tech company. What were those transitions? What were those businesses?
Well, my background's much, much less related to what I'm doing now, I guess, than Stacey's. Although technically I was telling a friend from college that my undergrad degree was in agricultural and biological engineering. So that maybe is related, but spent most of my career in the tech engineering field. I got my master's in mechanical engineering and worked in aerospace for a long time. So worked at a few different companies in Texas and California, designing and building satellites. So not craft beverage hospitality related, but definitely a maker.
Yeah.
Love sort of building things. So, that was something that I enjoyed. And, I think an engineer's mindset and problem solving is probably helpful for brewing, and it's a lot of process control and technique and things like that. There's an unlimited amount of sort of information that you could sort of learn and practice. But I was definitely similar to Stacy's, big company office jobs for most of my career, 20 years. I think the thing that probably helped me the most to make this leap was still in tech, but was starting my own company. So when we moved from California to Ithaca, a good friend and coworker, a friend of both of ours, a coworker of mine from California, came up with an idea for a satellite software tech related company while in Silicon Valley, and then had the crazy idea, like Stacey said, of well, take a tech company out of Silicon Valley, which was crazy 5 years ago, but I think is the norm now.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think with I'm definitely less of a risk taker, more calculated and methodical, I think, than Stacey. But I think at Stacey's urging and my friends Adam urging, they said, come out, help me co-found this company in Ithaca. After having only worked in big companies for 20 years and, jump to the punchline, never looking back. I think, once I did that, there's no way I'm going to go back to a big company. I got the bug. And I think that was probably the most important thing for me to help start a small company, to hit all those barriers like I was talking about. They just kind of keep hitting your head until you break through, not afraid to learn new things, understand all the different aspects of the business, from financial to hiring to staffing to culture to customers and partnerships and building relationships and all those kinds of things. I think that was the most valuable thing for me. And you need to give me the boost, because I already knew how to make beer.
Yeah.
But I think what a lot of people maybe struggle with is they passionate about this hobby and then try to maybe go professional with it and decide that maybe it was just better for them as a hobby because they don't like all those other things, or maybe they don't want to do it every day. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what gave me the big boost.
That's really interesting. How did you choose Ithaca? And kind of the preface is this, that there are places around the country that are attracting a lot of tech, whether it's Austin, Miami in conjunction with its efforts with crypto. Is there a similar movement happening in Ithaca?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of the sort of precursors of maybe what we're seeing now, amplified even to a greater level post-COVID. Just the reality of cost of living and quality of life. I think we were both fortunate enough that we came to California early, pre.com, and we were able to sort of ride up that housing wave, and I think we had a somewhat of a affordable livelihood, although we both had to make a lot of money to make the mortgage payments. Yep. But our friends and co-founders were a little bit younger, and they were having a hard time. Two white collar professionals, an engineer and an architect, who could barely, live in a small condo, I think, with like a $5,000 rent 5 years ago, and wanted to start a family. And I think it's even worse now. So quality of life was a big thing. We started the company with some tie-ins to Cornell, which is a great resource. We are part of a Startup New York program, which is a great program that is trying to revitalize the upstate New York economy and looking at, well, what does upstate New York have? Higher education is a big asset. So how can we get, tap into some of those higher educational resources and create new companies? And so there's a program that, helps companies out with that, with some tax breaks and programming and things like that. That was part of it. In the end, we ended up being closer to a lot of our customers, which are on the East Coast, New York City, Washington, D.C., access to venture capital funding. And for tech companies, technical talent, there is good technical talent in the area. So, kind of all the stars aligned, and happy to say that, the company's doing great. It's been 5 years. I'm still involved in it, still on the board. As an advisor, but they've gone through a B round of VC funding, raised a lot of funding, grew the team. It's going like crazy, and I think you've seen a lot of that here. And I think it'll turn up even more as people want to relocate to the area, both as individuals and as companies.
There were two things before I moved back here that I was really surprised of, which is kind of between Rochester and Ithaca, just how many universities, how many labs in those universities. And how many golf courses? So there's a lot to attract folks. I have friends in Silicon Valley too. Your experience with VCs, I've heard there's always a horror story involved in that. But just in general, some of the challenges you faced, some of the benefits, some of the negatives, anything you'd like to share on that?
It's quite an experience to, pitch your company. And I mean, my previous company, I probably pitched 200 times, and my co-founder and CEO probably pitched 300 times. So, learning to give your pitch, and really learning. We were all the co-founders were first time entrepreneurs. So just learning your business and what to pitch. And I think a lot of tech companies fall into the rut of solution looking for a problem. Like you get so enamored in the tech or the product that you don't really think about, well, who wants it and who's going to buy it. So, a lot of some VCs were sort of more help that guide you through it more and more. Some of them would just shut you down. Like, you haven't told me who your customers are going to be, who's going to buy this, how much, where you're going to get your source of revenue. So you definitely learn a lot as long as you're open to it, to what they'll feedback. And the other thing is, if you pitch it to 5 different people, you'll get 5 different responses. And so you just have to, some people will just say crazy things and you have to kind of write it off, and you have to, not, sort of get whiplash, too much back and forth. But, I think if you got a good story, and different VCs have different characters, there's definitely like this idea of a West Coast VC and East Coast VC. West Coast VCs will invest in something crazy, a theory, a vision. And so, East Coast will be, not surprisingly more conservative. So tell me about your customers, what's your pipeline look like? And the math works out in both cases. A Silicon Valley investor will invest in Facebook or social media, 10, 20 years ago, when people are like, well, what is this? And they can then place that one bet that will, 100x, 1000x increase in valuation, and invest in 99 other crazy things that just flop, but that one thing pays for it. East Coast will be a little bit more conservative. They won't have as many unicorns, but all the companies might tend to fare a little bit better because they raise the bar a little bit. So you have to kind of know who you're pitching to, and what do they want to see? They want to see crazy ideas, or they want to see more like the bottom line. So it's a good experience.
It's interesting kind of how the nomenclature is the same, but the experience is so different in the country. And there is a difference between the West and the East Coast. I mean, whether you're talking about like philosophers that follow Strauss, there's an East and West Coast, to VC, to culture. You've experienced the culture of living on the West Coast in California, now back small town, upstate New York. What do you see as the biggest contrasts? And it's not a preference, even just a difference in the life and the way people live and think.
I think because of the younger demographic, maybe in the San Francisco Bay Area, and kind of the ethos of these makers that, are in jeans and a grubby T-shirt that are worth millions because they're part of a tech startup. I think that has this sense of, you don't really know who's sitting next to you kind of scenario. And I think there's a lot more risk taking. I mean, we took more risks as 22-year-olds than we do as, 40-somethings, right? Yeah. So I think that sense of risk is a little bit more prominent maybe on the West Coast. And I think that manifests itself in, more adventurous food or experiences. So, sometimes maybe we've noticed that in smaller towns, they're really strong communities, and something that's really different is sometimes confusing at the onset because someone's never seen it like that before. So we always say in this adventure, the biggest compliment you can pay to us is when you come here and you say, I've never experienced anything like this. Yeah. That's cool to us because we want you to remember it, have a good experience. Obviously not, I hated it. I've never had anything that's bad, but that's a really high compliment to us because we want to try to push the envelope and try to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, I think in small towns and in rural areas, you can have a little bit of of everything. If you're adventurous, you're willing to try new things, and you can travel and go see the world and see new things you've never been exposed to. Because on the flip side, although we've got great friends in California, and I think Californians in general are very friendly and warming and easygoing. At least in the metropolitan areas, people are kind of coming and going all the time. Yeah. So I think on the street we lived in, we knew all our neighbors, all great people. I think only our one neighbor had grown up there. Everyone else had come and go. And we saw less of that in Ithaca. But you still had a mix of people, largely ties with the university that would sort of come and go. So it was definitely more of a community there than in California, and even more of a community here. So I think that's a nice thing is you get a stronger sense of community because people aren't sort of coming and going all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of when I was a kid growing up in California. Like 7-Eleven would have these little stickers you could buy, and it was like the old license plates, and it said native. Like this idea that like so many other people in California weren't natives. You were it was transplants that like you wanted to make sure people know you'd always been here. And you're right. Like it is different because there is a community. There's a community memory. Mm-hmm. Bob Poole's parents bought a house and they know the history from 150 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite things about the region. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You feel like you're part of something bigger and longer going on than yourself. I think that's important. Yeah. I think that Californians miss out on that because it's enriched my life. Yeah. Just when you think about it. And Stacy, your experience as an entrepreneur, that transition, has that worked out for you? Have you enjoyed this struggle?
It's been an interesting kind of experience. I mean, in my world, we would obviously have responsibilities to the brand, whether it was a Marriott or Hyatt. And so upholding those kind of brand standards so that the guests that came to San Francisco had the same experience as in Chicago or what have you. But we also were tied to who physically owned our building, our hotel. And so now we're the people that own the building, and we're the people responsible for the brand. So I think that's been kind of an interesting shift of, well, I don't have to ask permission for this stuff. We have to ask permission of each other and make sure that we're aligned. But that is freeing and yet super scary because I think both of us are wired to be successful. We want to do right by the people that work for us. We want to do right by the banks that have lent us money. We want to not deplete our entire retirement savings. Yeah. But on that same respect, it's super scary, but it's super fun and invigorating. And I don't have to ask permission. If an idea flops, 2 weeks from now, we go, okay, let's change it.
Yeah.
Let's just do it.
That is one of the things I love about being an entrepreneur and being in this space. You'll generally know pretty quickly if one of your ideas isn't working. Yeah. And you can pivot pretty quickly as well.
That's right. Yep.
Was there anything else you guys would like to add, you'd like people to know, you'd like to share?
Drink more beer. And mussels.
Yeah. Final thing, what other food options do you guys have?
We're trying something new every week, almost every day. So he's been pumping out with his brother, who was our first, helping him in the brewery, our first employee. Nice. They've been pumping out new beers every 3 to 4 days. So it's been fun for us to kind of pair food with the beer and experience that. So, we've got different vegetarian options, cheeses, meats. Chef, we released a rye pale ale, which was kind of a cool Belgian twist with some different yeasts. And we kind of all tasted it as a group, and we said, man, this goes really good with pastrami. So they got super excited, the chefs did, to brine some great pastrami, and we got to taste it in a sandwich for last night, and we're like, this is off the hook. It's so good. But so it's been kind of an adventure. So yeah.
That's great. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to close this out. So this has been Derek and Stacy Edinger with the amazing new Brewery Ardennes. From satellites and global hotel chains to a nice family brewery in Geneva, New York, where they're going to be leaving a legacy that I'm sure will last quite a long time. Thanks for watching Viticulture, and we'll see you soon. I hope you enjoyed this show. This has been Viticulture, where we share ways to cultivate a good life. Don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com. Subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks again for stopping by.